Imagine your body as a place that never truly sleeps, a place where millions of tiny processes are happening every second without asking for your permission. Your heart beats, your lungs move, your cells repair themselves. And somewhere, quietly and without attention, your pancreas is working too. But here's the strange part. It's not just working randomly. It's following a schedule. Not a schedule you wrote down, not something you consciously control, but a deep, built-in timing system that has been shaped over millions of years. Every day, the sun rises and sets. Light comes in, darkness follows. This pattern has been so consistent throughout Earth's history that life itself has adapted to it. Your body is no exception. Inside you exists something called a circadian rhythm, a roughly 24-hour cycle that influences almost everything you do, from when you feel awake to when you feel tired. But this rhythm is not just in your brain. That's where most people imagine it, like a central clock controlling everything else. And yes, there is a kind of master clock in the brain that responds to light. But the surprising discovery is that this is not the whole story. Your organs have their own clocks. Your liver doesn't just process nutrients randomly, it follows a daily pattern. Your heart doesn't beat in exactly the same way at all times. It subtly shifts depending on the time of day. And your pancreas, the organ responsible for managing your blood sugar, also follows its own internal timing. This is where things begin to feel less like a machine and more like a coordinated system. Think of your body not as a single clock, but as an orchestra. Each organ is like a musician. The brain might act like a conductor, setting the overall tempo, but each musician still has their own sheet of music, their own timing, their own role. When everything is aligned, the system works beautifully. But when the timing drifts, even slightly, the harmony begins to change. Your pancreas is one of those musicians. It doesn't just respond to food whenever it appears. It anticipates patterns. It adjusts its activity depending on the time of day. In the earlier part of the day, it tends to be more responsive, more prepared to handle incoming nutrients. Later on, that responsiveness begins to shift. What's fascinating is that this timing exists even if you try to ignore it. Even if you eat at unusual hours, even if you stay awake through the night, even if you disrupt your routine completely, the internal clocks inside your organs keep ticking. They are influenced by your behavior, yes, but they are not entirely controlled by it. They are embedded deeply within your biology, written into the way your cells function. Inside each pancreatic cell, there are genes that turn on and off in cycles, creating a rhythm of activity that repeats every day. This means your body is not just reacting to what you do in the moment. It is constantly preparing for what it expects will happen next. And this creates a subtle but powerful idea. Your biology is not only shaped by events, it is shaped by timing. So when you think about your pancreas, don't imagine a simple organ that turns on when you eat and turns off when you don't. Instead, imagine something more dynamic. A system that rises and falls, speeds up and slows down, all according to an internal sense of time that you cannot see, but are always living within. To understand why this internal timing matters, you first have to understand what the pancreas is actually doing. It's easy to ignore this organ because you never feel it working. It doesn't ache like muscles or beat like the heart. It stays silent. But silence in biology often hides something essential. Every time you eat, especially when you eat carbohydrates like bread, rice, or sugar, your digestive system breaks that food down into smaller molecules. One of the most important of these is glucose. Glucose enters your bloodstream and begins circulating throughout your body. It is in a sense a form of fuel, something your cells can use to produce energy. But there's a problem. Glucose cannot simply enter cells on its own in large amounts. Without control, it would build up in the blood, and that would be dangerous. So your body uses a signaling system to manage it. This is where the pancreas comes in. Inside the pancreas are tiny clusters of cells, called beta cells. These cells have a very specific job. They monitor the level of glucose in your blood. You can think of them as highly sensitive sensors, constantly sampling what is passing by. When glucose levels rise after a meal, these beta cells respond by releasing a hormone called insulin. Insulin is not energy, it is not fuel, it is a message. It travels through the bloodstream and reaches cells throughout your body, muscle cells, fat cells, liver cells, and tells them something very simple. Now is the time to open up and take in glucose. You can imagine each cell as a room with a locked door. Glucose is outside, waiting to enter. Insulin is the key that unlocks that door. Without insulin, the doors remain mostly closed. With insulin, they open, and glucose moves inside, where it can be used or stored. As glucose leaves the bloodstream and enters cells, blood sugar levels begin to fall back toward normal. The pancreas senses this change and reduces insulin release. It's a continuous feedback loop: measure, respond, adjust. What makes this system remarkable is how quickly and precisely it operates. Within minutes of eating, your body begins adjusting. Within hours, it returns to balance. Most of the time, you are completely unaware that this is happening. But here's where things become more interesting. This process is not identical at all times of the day. The pancreas does not release insulin with the same strength, speed, or efficiency every time you eat. The same meal can trigger different responses depending on when it is consumed. In the earlier part of the day, the beta cells tend to respond more robustly. They release insulin more effectively, and the body clears glucose from the blood more efficiently. Cells are more willing to open their doors. The entire system feels coordinated and smooth. Later in the day, something subtly shifts. The same rise in glucose does not produce quite the same insulin response. The signaling becomes slightly weaker, slightly slower. Cells do not respond with the same sensitivity. The doors don't open as easily. The difference is not dramatic in a single moment. You won't feel it directly. But it is measurable. Scientists can track blood sugar levels and see that, for the same meal, the body handles glucose less efficiently in the evening than in the morning. This leads to an important realization. The pancreas is not just reacting to glucose levels. It is reacting to time. It is as if those beta cells are not only asking how much glucose is there, but also what time is it? And depending on the answer to that second question, the response changes. Scientists didn't arrive at this idea suddenly. It emerged slowly, almost reluctantly, from patterns that didn't quite fit expectations. At first, the assumption was simple. If you give the body the same input, you should get the same output. If a person eats a specific meal, say a fixed amount of carbohydrates, the rise and fall of blood sugar should look roughly the same each time. That's how we tend to think about biological systems. Predictable, consistent, almost mechanical. But when researchers began testing this carefully, something didn't line up. They would take the same individual and give them the same meal under controlled conditions. Calories measured, nutrients balanced, environment stable. The only thing that changed was the time of day. Morning trials showed one pattern. Blood glucose would rise, insulin would respond quickly, and levels would return to baseline relatively smoothly. Evening trials told a different story. The glucose spike was higher. The return to normal was slower. The system, in some subtle way, was less efficient. At first, this could have been dismissed as noise, small variations that naturally occur in biological experiments. But the pattern kept repeating across different people, different populations, different labs. The more data accumulated, the harder it became to ignore. This wasn't random. It was systematic. Researchers then began asking a deeper question. If the input is the same and the output is different, what hidden variable are we missing? Time turned out to be that variable. But time in this context is not just a number on a clock. It is something embedded in the biology itself. When scientists looked inside the pancreas at the cellular level, they found something remarkable. The beta cells, the ones responsible for releasing insulin, were not operating in a constant state. Their internal activity changed over the course of the day. Certain genes became more active at specific times, others became less active. Proteins involved in insulin production and release fluctuated in concentration. Even the sensitivity of the cells to glucose signals varied. It was as if the cells themselves were following a daily script. This script is driven by molecular feedback loops. Inside each cell, there are genes that activate other genes, which then circle back and suppress the originals, creating oscillations. These oscillations repeat roughly every 24 hours, forming a built-in rhythm. What's important is that this rhythm continues even in the absence of external cues. In laboratory conditions, where light, food, and activity are controlled or removed, these cellular clocks keep ticking. That tells us something profound. The timing is not just imposed from the outside world. It is generated from within. Now imagine millions of these cells, each with its own clock, all loosely synchronized. The result is not perfect precision, but a coordinated pattern. a rise and fall in the pancreas's ability to respond. During certain hours, the machinery for insulin release is more ready, the pathways are primed, the signals flow efficiently, and the response is strong. At other times, that readiness declines. The same glucose signal arrives, but the cellular machinery is not in the same state. The response is weaker, slower, less coordinated. This is not failure, it is timing. And once you begin to see it this way, the earlier observations start to make sense. The higher evening blood sugar spikes are not mysterious anymore. They are the visible outcome of an invisible rhythm, but there is still something unsettling about it. We tend to think of control systems in the body as reactive. Something happens and the body responds. But here, the response is shaped in advance. The system behaves differently not because the input changed, but because the internal state changed before the input even arrived. That challenges a very basic intuition. It suggests that your body is not just responding to the present, it is carrying a memory of time built into its structure, influencing how it will respond before anything even happens. If you try to visualize this idea, it helps to step away from biology for a moment and imagine something more familiar. Picture a factory that runs every day. In the morning, the workers arrive energized. Machines are clean, systems are calibrated, and everything is ready to handle incoming orders. When requests come in, they are processed quickly and efficiently. There is coordination, speed, and clarity in the system. As the day progresses, things begin to change. The workers are still there, the machines are still running, but the rhythm is different. There is a slight slowdown. Not enough to stop production, but enough to make it less precise. Small delays appear. Responses are not as sharp as they were earlier. By evening, the factory is still operational, but it is no longer in its optimal state. Some workers are fatigued. Psst, psst. Some systems are preparing to shut down. The entire environment is shifting toward rest, even if the doors are still open. Now take that picture and translate it into your body. Your pancreas behaves in a surprisingly similar way. In the earlier part of the day, the cellular machinery inside the pancreas is in a highly responsive state. The beta cells are more sensitive to glucose signals. The pathways that lead to insulin release are more active. When food arrives, the response is quick and effective, like a well-prepared factory handling a rush of orders. As time moves forward, this state begins to shift. The same beta cells are still there. They haven't disappeared. But their internal condition is not identical anymore. The sensitivity to glucose decreases slightly. The signaling pathways are not as active. The release of insulin becomes less immediate, less robust. Nothing has broken, nothing is malfunctioning. But the system is no longer operating at peak efficiency. This is what scientists mean when they talk about a pancreas clock. It is not a physical clock you can point to, it is a pattern of readiness, a cycle of high and low responsiveness that repeats each day. What makes this idea more interesting is that it is not isolated to the pancreas alone. The pancreas is part of a larger network of organs, each following its own rhythm while staying loosely coordinated with the others. Your liver, for example, changes how it processes and stores glucose depending on the time of day. Your muscles vary in how efficiently they take up glucose. Hormones that interact with insulin also rise and fall in cycles. So the pancreas is not working alone. It is part of a coordinated system that shifts its overall behavior across the day. When everything is aligned, when the pancreas is responsive, the cells are sensitive, and the supporting systems are in sync. The handling of glucose is smooth and efficient, but when this alignment shifts, even slightly, the entire response changes. Food that would be handled easily at one time becomes more difficult to manage at another, and this happens without any conscious awareness. You don't feel your pancreas becoming less responsive. You don't notice the slight delay in insulin release. There is no immediate signal telling you that the internal timing has changed. From the outside, everything seems the same. You eat the same meal, in the same way, in the same environment. But internally, the conditions are different. This creates a quiet mismatch between what you are doing and what your body is prepared for. It is not dramatic enough to be obvious in a single moment, but over time, these small differences accumulate. The repeated experience of handling nutrients under less optimal conditions begins to leave measurable traces, and all of it traces back to something that feels almost intangible. The shifting state of readiness inside your organs, guided by a clock that never appears, but is always running. To make this idea clearer, it helps to step into a controlled mental experiment. Something simple, but revealing. Imagine two versions of the same person. Not similar people, not people with different habits, but literally identical in every measurable way. Same body, same genetics, same sleep, same environment. The only difference between them is a single variable: time. In one case, this person eats a meal at 9 in the morning. In the other, the exact same meal is eaten at 9 at night. Same portion, same nutrients, same speed of eating. Nothing else changes. Now imagine that you could observe what is happening inside both bodies with perfect precision. You can track glucose levels in the blood, measure how much insulin is released, and see how quickly cells absorb that glucose. At first, you might expect the results to overlap almost perfectly. After all, the system is the same, and the input is the same. But they don't. In the morning version, glucose rises after the meal, but the increase is controlled. The pancreas responds quickly, releasing insulin in a coordinated way. Cells respond efficiently, opening their pathways to absorb glucose. Within a relatively short time, the system stabilizes again. In the evening version, something feels slightly off. Glucose still rises, but it rises higher. The pancreas still releases insulin, but not with the same strength or timing. The cells still respond, but less effectively. The return to balance takes longer. The difference is not extreme, but it is consistent. And that consistency is what makes it meaningful. If you were to repeat this experiment many times, across many individuals, the same pattern would appear again and again. Morning responses tend to be smoother, evening responses tend to be more strained. This leads to a subtle but important shift in how you think about the body. It suggests that the system is not only responding to what is happening in the moment, but also to when it is happening. It's as if each version of the person is not just processing food, but processing it within a different internal environment. The morning body is in a state of readiness. The internal systems that manage glucose are aligned, synchronized, and prepared. Signals move efficiently, responses are timely. The system behaves like a well-coordinated network. The evening body, on the other hand, is in a different phase. The same systems are present, but they are not in the same state. Some processes are winding down, others are shifting toward rest. The coordination is still there, but it is not as sharp. So the same action, eating a meal, interacts with two different internal conditions. This creates two different outcomes. What makes this difficult to intuit is that, from the outside, nothing appears to have changed. You don't feel like a different person at 9 a.m. versus 9 p.m. in any dramatic sense. Your identity, your awareness, your decisions all feel continuous. But beneath that continuity, your physiology is moving through distinct phases. Each phase has its own characteristics, its own strengths, its own limitations. And the pancreas, quietly and without announcement, adjusts its behavior within those phases. This thought experiment highlights something deeper. The body is not a static system waiting for input. It is a dynamic system moving through time, constantly changing its internal state. So when an event occurs, like eating, it is not just the event itself that matters. It is the interaction between that event and the current state of the system. The outcome you observe is shaped by both. And once you begin to see it this way, the idea that your pancreas behaves differently at different times of day no longer feels strange. It begins to feel inevitable. When we talk about this idea seriously, it becomes important to separate what has been clearly observed from what is still uncertain. It's very easy to take a pattern and turn it into a story that feels complete, even when it isn't. But in science, there is always a boundary between what we can measure and what we are still trying to understand. What we can say with confidence is that the body's response to glucose changes over the course of the day. This is not based on a single experiment or a small data set. It has been observed across controlled laboratory studies, clinical settings, and long-term metabolic research. If you measure how sensitive the body is to insulin, how effectively cells respond to the signal, you find that this sensitivity is generally higher earlier in the day. In simple terms, when insulin is released in the morning, cells are more willing to accept glucose. The signal is stronger, and the response is more efficient. Later in the day, that sensitivity decreases. The same amount of insulin does not produce the same level of glucose uptake. Cells become slightly resistant to the signal, not in a pathological sense, but in a rhythmic, time-dependent way. At the same time, the pancreas itself does not behave identically across the day. The beta cells that release insulin show variations in how much insulin they produce and how quickly they release it. These changes are not random. They follow patterns that align with the internal circadian rhythm. When scientists look inside these cells, they find molecular mechanisms that support this idea. Certain genes associated with insulin production and secretion show daily cycles of activity. Proteins involved in detecting glucose and triggering insulin release also fluctuate. Even the electrical activity of beta cells, the signals that lead to insulin being released, can vary depending on the time of day. All of this points to a coordinated system, where both the signal insulin and the response to that signal, cellular uptake of glucose, are influenced by timing. Another line of evidence comes from situations where this timing is disrupted. People who work night shifts, for example, often eat at times that are out of sync with their natural circadian rhythm. Their internal clocks may still be aligned with a daytime schedule, but their behavior is shifted into the night. In these cases, researchers frequently observe higher blood glucose levels, reduced insulin sensitivity, and an increased risk of metabolic disorders over time. This does not prove that timing is the only factor, but it strongly suggests that alignment between behavior and internal clocks plays a significant role. However, even with all this evidence, there are still important gaps in understanding. We do not fully know why the pancreas becomes less responsive later in the day. We can describe the mechanisms, the changing gene expression, the shifting protein levels, but the deeper reason for this design is still unclear. It might be related to energy efficiency, where the body allocates resources differently across the day. It might reflect evolutionary patterns, where food intake historically occurred earlier and the system adapted accordingly. Or it might involve interactions with other organs and hormones that we do not yet fully understand. There is also variability between individuals. Not everyone has the exact same rhythm. Some people may show stronger differences between morning and evening responses, while others show more subtle changes. Factors like sleep, diet, activity, and genetics all interact with these rhythms in complex ways. So while the overall pattern is clear, the full picture is still incomplete. And that incompleteness is not a weakness of the idea. It is a reminder of how complex biological systems are. Even something that appears simple, like the release of insulin in response to food, turns out to be shaped by layers of timing, coordination, and internal structure that we are still in the process of uncovering.